Thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary Buttigieg, I appreciate that the department has specifically committed to investing discretionary funding in rural areas consistent with congressional directives. However, I am concerned that pending regulatory matters, the department are not adequately considering rural states. In establishing the Roots Council, this committee directed the department through the council to ensure that the unique transportation needs and attributes of rural areas and Indian tribes are fully addressed during the development and implementation of programs, policies, and activities of the department. That's quoting from the directive. At last week's hearing before the Appropriations Subcommittee, you mentioned that a proposed greenhouse gas performance rule was sent to OMB. My question is, did the department subject this proposal to careful consideration by the Roots Council in developing this rule consistent with the congressional directive that I mentioned above?
I will check whether the Roots Council, which is an internal body, has been involved, or to what extent they've been involved in the GHG rule, and get back to you on that.
Well, if you would, I mean, I think that unique needs and attributes of rural areas, things like population density, need to be adequately addressed in the rule. And as you know, measures to reduce emissions in urban areas, such as increased public transit, are generally not viable in rural areas. So I would ask that if this particular review was not done by the Roots Council, that the rule be withdrawn from OMB and that review be undertaken. Is that something you can commit to ensuring that input from the Roots Council will be incorporated into the proposed rule?
I don't know that I could commit to withdrawing it from the OMB process, but I certainly will commit that this rule and any rule will consider the interests and needs of lower density rural and tribal communities.
Back to AVs, you just got a question on that. As you know, it's something I've worked over the past several years to try and address in a bipartisan fashion, and that is to enact automated vehicles legislation, which I do believe is the key to ensuring that AVs are tested and deployed under a safe and consistent regulatory framework. And I remain committed to advancing this critical emerging technology. But in the absence of legislation, I believe it's essential for the department to establish a framework for the testing and deployment of AVs. Measures such as granting exemption petitions or updating relevant regulations are crucial to modernizing vehicle safety standards and gathering relevant safety data to ensure that the U.S. maintains its leadership in this important technology. Will the department continue to support AV testing and demonstration initiatives to ensure that the United States does not fall behind in testing and deploying this critical safety technology? And a follow-up, if so, could you describe the department's work to advance some of those programs?
Yes, thank you. The short answer is yes, and I'll share a couple examples that are within the realm of our existing authorities, even pending congressional action to pave the way for further work on AVs. One is that NHTSA has the authority under Section 555 to allow the deployment of vehicles that would be exempt from safety standards as long as an operator can show that it would lead to an equivalent level of safety. There's a cap on that, 2,500 vehicles per year for 2 years. And they can be extended too. One exemption so far has been granted to a company called Neuro. We do have additional petitions for exemption and are moving to try to address those promptly. The other thing I would mention is there's the exemption called Box 7, that's for imported vehicles. And a number of exemptions have been granted to allow for the deployment of AVs. That's on very restricted and specific routes, but another way to make sure that some of these innovations are playing out on U.S. soil.
The nation's trucking industry is the backbone of our economy, which we found out during the pandemic. And I've advocated for a regulatory framework that provides the flexibility that truckers need to safely deliver goods across the country, which is why I was pleased by the FMCSA's publication of a final rule in June 2020 to increase hours of service flexibility. And I will continue to advocate for increased flexibility for agricultural and livestock haulers who face unique circumstances associated with the goods that they transport. Could you describe how the department and FMCSA are adequately considering the needs of small truckers and haulers, I should say, of agricultural goods when evaluating some of these regulatory actions?
Thank you. Yes, we recognize that those who are hauling agricultural goods in the cold chain or in particular livestock face different issues than if you're hauling a load of shoes or other inanimate objects. And I think the framework of exemptions and the different ELD requirements are intended to reflect that. As your question notes, this is about being safe and efficient at the same time. Our North Star, of course, has to be safety, but when we can provide flexibility that doesn't cut against the goal of safety, we will continue to do so.
Well, and I hope that you will look for ways to do that. That flexibility is really key, and there are in rural areas, particularly when you're hauling these types of loads, this kind of freight, I think there ought to be a different application of some of these regulations, which can be not only very expensive, but make it very, very difficult for agricultural producers to get their animals and commodities to their destination. Thank you.